In 1907 in Zurich, Switzerland, Sabine Spielrein, a hysterical lady, is restrained by two men on the way to the Berghalsy clinic. As the carriage comes to a halt in front of the institute, she cries and yells. The staff then assists them in carrying her inside while she screams and flails. Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, presents himself to Sabine in one of the therapy rooms. He informs her that he is the one who got her into the institute. Sabine, who is frenzied and shivering, attempts to convince him that she is not mad, but her actions speak for themselves. Jung promises to chat to her for an hour or two every day to assist her figure out what is bothering her. He says that he will sit behind her as a diversion and that she should avoid looking at him as much as possible. He passes by her and takes a seat behind her. Sabine attempts to protect herself, afraid of being injured. Jung sits down and asks Sabine what triggers her attacks. Her body contorts as she attempts to enunciate the word humiliation. She goes on to say that her father is often angry with her. He used to beat his children and then have them kiss his hand. Sabine and Jung go down a woodland trail the next day. Sabine tells him about her angel, a voice in her brain that informs her what people are going to say before they do. Jung believes that would be a valuable skill for her to have as a doctor. She has a dream that she does not believe will come true. Jung apologizes to Sabine as he walks farther into the woods, informing her he will be gone for some time for necessary military duty. She rants that it's a waste of time and breaks down as she throws her coat. Jung tries to calm her down. He then picks up her coat and beats it to remove the dirt, which triggers Sabine. The next day, Sabine rebels and refuses to eat. Her nurse tries to reason with her, but when the situation becomes too much, she calls for Dr. Bueller. A few moments later, Bueller goes to Sabine's room to check in on her. The nurse accompanies him, but discovers no one in her room. Meanwhile, 3 members of the institute staff are struggling to keep Sabine under control. She frolics in a dirty pond, unwilling to leave. Bueller appears and asks whether she has any hobbies to keep her busy, prompting her to say suicide. She also expresses her desire to never meet Jung again. Without a choice, the crew drags Sabine from the water and drags her to the loo against her will. As she eventually calms down, the nurses place her in the tub and bathe her. Jung comes a few weeks later and pays Sabine a visit in her room. He gives her the opportunity to learn medicine by assisting him with research and work, a proposition that piques Sabine's curiosity and causes her to quit sulking. She then turns away from him to hide her excitement. Jung has another interview with Sabine the next day. He inquires about her restless evenings. She tells him she can't sleep at night because she hears a presence, like a cat, talking in her ear but doesn't comprehend what it's saying. She then informs him that she has a sticky sensation on her back. After a few minutes, Jung asks whether she got excited when she felt the slime on her back. Sabine admits to him that she did, which makes her realize how much she likes the pain and shame. She then informs him that she should never be allowed to leave the institute. 2 years later, Emma and Jung traveled to Vienna, Austria, to meet with Freud. The pair rides in a carriage to Freud's house. Jung informs Freud about the efficacy of psychoanalysis within Freud's office. Freud then inquires about Sabine's situation and therapy. Jung informs him that her deep-seated traumas lead her to have pathological sexual desires, which Freud claims is frequent among his patients. Later that day, Freud and Jung continue their talk in the bar. Freud informs him that the sexual aspect of his research is a problem that the public will not tolerate. He also informs Jung that his studies are being postponed owing to the hazards of media misrepresentation. That night in Freud's office, Jung shares him about a dream he had involving a horse being slowed down by a log, a carriage, and a horse with a rider. Freud deduces that the horse represents Jung, and the things slowing him down are his wife, children, and potential children in the future. As for the log, Freud tells him that it might represent his penis as a symbol of fertility. Back in Switzerland, Jung meets up with Sabine and discusses his meeting with Freud. He tells her that he thinks there's more about the study than the sexual aspects of it, but Sabine argues that Freud is right and that her case proves it. A few days later, Otto Gross, a drug-fueled doctor who uses sexual methods in his study, is sent to be admitted to Berghalsy. Along with his arrival comes a note from Freud telling them that Otto should not be freed until he takes responsibility of his case in October. They should also be cautious since he is potentially harmful. Jung attempts to question Gross in his office, but he appears unconcerned and swears nothing is wrong with him. Gross walks about the workplace and goes through his belongings throughout the interview. He even takes medicines from Jung's drawer and throws his mail about. That night, Otto and Jung smoke together and discuss their disagreements. Otto attempts to persuade him that monogamy limits people's freedom. Jung maintains that their role is to help individuals, even bringing up Otto's patient who committed suicide. Otto informs him, without sorrow or regret, that he merely gave her the release she desired. Jung meets Sabine on the bay the next day. She informs him that opposites attract, and with them comes invention. She then kisses him and invites him to spend private time with her at her house at any moment. Otto and Jung discuss Sabina's activities the next day. Otto believes he should indulge in her and sees no harm in doing so. Jung denies it, telling Otto that the more they converse, the more certain he is of his techniques and studies. Otto then claims that it is the opposite for him. Jung meets with Sabina in his office the next day. Jung confides with her about his concerns regarding Otto. He is afraid of being impacted and swayed by Otto's comments, thinking that he might truly follow his basic instincts rather than his logical thinking. Meanwhile, Otto is sleeping in the rear of the facility with one of the nurses who gave him a ladder. He uses the ladder to escape over the wall after wallowing in pleasure. After learning of Otto's absence, Jung visits to his room later that day. Jung searches around the cluttered room for Otto's letter. Otto appreciates Jung for everything in it. He advises Jung not to waste his opportunity, and ends the letter by asking Jung to tell his father that he died. That night, Jung goes to Sabina's home, finally giving in. The two share an intimate night as soon as he enters the door. After that, Jung visits Sabina again. She kisses him, but he tries to stop her and seriously tells her to end their affair. However, she doesn't listen to him and only tries to seduce him more. A few days later, Emma gives birth to Jung's first son, and Jung happily comes home to them. Emma then asks if he'll return to her now that they have a family. Jung and Freud meet again a few months later. Freud says that sending Otto to him was a mistake. Jung, on the other hand, tells him that he is glad he did since it helped him be assured of his decision. Freud then informs him that, in the absence of Otto, Jung is now the heir to his work. That night, Jung and Freud had a disagreement. Jung informs him that there must be more to psychoanalysis than just the sexual component. He attempts to persuade Freud that there is no such thing as coincidence. Freud contends that their research is so delicate that they should only investigate things scientifically. Jung takes Freud on a boat cruise a few days later. While aboard the boat, Freud informs Jung of the rumors about him and Sabina, but Jung rejects them. Freud then admits that he, too, does not believe it. That's exactly what he's been telling everyone. Jung goes to see Sabina the next day with the intention of ending their romance. Sabina begs him not to go, but Jung is adamant about not risking his job. He then walks away as she begins to cry. While eating breakfast the next morning, Emma asks Jung whether he knows anything about the anonymous letters, prompting him to stop in shock. She then informs him that she doesn't expect him to go without a fight, emphasizing that Sabina penned them. Sabina then writes to Freud and requests to meet with him. She informs him that it will be beneficial to them both. Freud, perplexed by the letter, writes to Jung about it. Jung then adds that the writer is Sabina, who may be seeking retaliation for what happened to him. Jung advises him that she is violent and that he should avoid assisting her. Freud chooses to answer to Sabina's letter a few days later. He informs her that he does not trust her claims against Jung. He also does not want to become engaged in their romance. Whatever it is, it should be kept between her and Jung. The following day, Sabina goes to Jung's office, where she sees him packing. Sabina confronts him about the letter and tells him to tell the truth to Freud. She also requests to be Freud's patient, which he agrees to do. A few nights later, on the ferry heading to America, Jung and Freud discuss Jung's dream about a father refusing to die. Freud deduces that the old man represents himself, making the situation awkward. Freud then hints at the dream he had but refuses to tell him. At Jung's home, Sabina arrives to deliver her dissertation on the order of Freud. She tells him that Freud believes it's what Jung needs for his yearbook. They then resolve to work on it together, attempting to forget their past. Jung and Sabina work on her papers to publish it the following Tuesday. They love working on it together and soon revert to their old habits of relaxing one another. Later that day, Sabina informs him of her intention to leave Zurich after graduation. Jung then begins to cry, finally revealing his feelings for her. 2 years later, in Vienna, Freud praises Sabina's research but criticizes her for including religion in it. She then asks if it was the source of his and Jung's disagreement, which he rejects. He acknowledges that he misjudged him as his successor. He then shifts the issue by giving her 2 of his patients to treat. In September, Jung meets with Freud to discuss his discussion of Akhenaten. He attempts to explain that there may be more to it, like a son trying to outdo his father and move on with his life. Freud then points out that this is why he was not given credit in Jung's work. Jung argues that he did so because he believes Freud has become widely recognized and that he does not need to be mentioned again. A few seconds later, the two continue to quarrel until Freud collapses to the ground from a stroke. Fortunately, he survives. They exchange letters over the following 3 days, not as friends or co-workers, but as adversaries. They each mistrust the authenticity of the other and finally part ways by shutting each other out of their life. A year later, Emma and Sabina have breakfast together. Emma then offers to assist her husband, who has grown confused and restless. Jung's condition is worsening. Sabina hesitates but says she'll try. Sabina then sits with Jung by the river and attempts to reason with him. Jung admits to experiencing apocalyptic visions of being washed away by a flood. When asked what he believes his dream symbolizes, he changes the subject. Instead, he inquires about her goals, to which she nonchalantly replies that she intends to return to Russia and work as a psychiatrist there. However, whenever he thinks of Freud, he is filled with uncertainty and hatred. Sabina then reminds him that Freud's method, which he used in her treatment, cured her. Suddenly, Jung confesses his regret for letting her go, as she was the most important thing in his life, for his love for her made him understand who he is. However, things have changed, and for better or worse, they still choose to go their separate ways. In the end, they individually pursued their own ambitions, as Sabina became a distinct trainer of the most distinguished analyst of the new Soviet Union, and Jung as the world's leading psychologist during the First World War. Despite these accolades, Freud was pushed out of Vienna by the Nazis and died of cancer in London.